You guys see what Deion Sanders said about Shedeur Sanders recently? Deion Sanders finally spoke about Shedeur Sanders falling in the NFL draft, and he ripped a quote unquote foolish report about Shedeur Sanders falling in the draft. Let me be clear with you guys about something about Deion Sanders, okay? I like the guys that coach Colorado. If you guys follow me on my other podcast, Off the Hook Sports, I have been very objective and very fair with Deion Sanders. I'm not called him a circus act. I've talked about how there are certain things I don't like that he's doing, but I've actually been very impressed with the job he has done at Colorado, and I always felt there was reason to believe in him. But I didn't like some of his behavior last year, going at people that were talking bad about his son, or that he felt were attacking his son's quality of quarterback, particularly when he went at other players. It was a little weird for a coach to do that. I had a problem with that. Deion had raised his kids clearly to believe that they had warranted a level of hype that, to be fair, some kids do warrant. Deion warranted it. Here's the problem with Deion Sanders and Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur Sanders is carrying himself with the level of physical value that Deion Sanders carried himself with coming out of college into the NFL 40 years, 35 years before. Why do I say that? Deion Sanders, as a two-sport athlete, four-sport athlete, two-way athlete in football, was so physically gifted that you knew, he knew, everybody knew he was a can't-miss prospect. Shedeur Sanders was not a can't-miss prospect, but he carried himself like he was can't-miss on the level of Deion Sanders in 1987, and that was a problem. And so let's talk about some of the reasons he fell to the fifth round. But first, Deion Sanders specifically was citing a report that Shedeur Sanders was unprepared during pre-draft meetings, but he's also saying he's not buying the validity of them. Now, to Deion Sanders' defense, it might be true that he's not buying how valid it is. Honestly, Deion Sanders says, quote, "It did hurt, but the Bible said God uses foolish things to confound the wise. There was some foolish stuff that went on, but that gave them something they needed." And then he said, like that edge that Tom had, it gave them the edge that you had. It gave them the edge that I have. Folks said we weren't going to be nothing, but we had to prove that. It gave them the edge that they needed, both of them. Okay, first of all, Deion Sanders, stop with this. People said we weren't going to be anything. I hope you're not including yourself in that with Tom Brady or Shedeur or your son, even for that matter. You were highly touted pretty much immediately. You were the fifth pick in the 1989 NFL draft, okay? So it's not like, oh, nobody believed in me. No, people believed in you, bro. You're in the College Football Hall of Fame. People believed in you. You were electric in college at Florida State. Okay, so let's stop with that. However, Tom Brady, you're right. But I can tell you this right now, Tom Brady did not get near the hype Shedeur Sanders got in the offseason or when he was in college. Now, I believe in Shedeur Sanders as a quarterback. I still do. I actually think he will win the Browns starting job. But let's talk about some of the things Shedeur did that might have rubbed people the wrong way that he could have overcome if he had the physical tools. Problem is he doesn't. The two legendary clothing line. The workout combine. He didn't show up. Now, people will say, well, Caleb Williams showed up. Yeah, Caleb Williams had more physical gifts than Shedeur Sanders. We're going to get to that. And then also the reports that only 5 teams, he was only willing to fully interview and commit himself with 5 teams. Now, why is all this relevant? Because Shedeur Sanders doesn't have the arm strength that a Cam Ward has, who, by the way, I think Shedeur is actually a better prospect than Cam Ward, but he doesn't have the arm strength that a Cam Ward has. He doesn't have the arm strength that a Caleb Williams had the year before. The NFL, and it's still dumb how they do this, but they overvalue physical attributes, particularly in the offseason. And when Cam Ward had his chance to showcase all that at the combine, it was pretty much over that he was going to be the top pick. And with Shedeur Sanders not impressing people with his arm strength, even though he's accurate, it was going to result in him falling if he didn't show other intangibles people want. So he could not afford to skip workouts. He could not afford to skip combines. And he certainly could not afford to only interview fully with 5 teams. Now, that report that he only interviewed with 5 teams is a little murky. It seems like he interviewed with others, but it's how committed was he to those others? That's the real question, okay? But Deion Sanders is cherry picking when he talks about the report that Shedeur Sanders was woefully unprepared for interviews. We're not attacking him for being unprepared for interviews, okay? We're going at him because he wasn't good enough to not be fully in on all-season workouts, off-season interviews, and things like that. That's how he falls to the 5th round. When you also consider the fact that people expect Deion to be involved, you can see why there were some problems with Shedeur Sanders and how things would happen. I think he could end up being fine with the Browns. But Shedeur Sanders was not the type of quarterback that was capable or had the leverage to play hardball the way some other quarterbacks do. Okay. He was a fringe number one pick, not a clear cut one. Everybody likes to bring up an Eli Manning. Eli Manning was a clear cut number one pick with a massive arm. Also, Eli Manning didn't mind falling because Eli Manning had a decent backing and knew he was going to go somewhere and people were going to spend time on him to be the starter. Eli Manning, while his stats weren't Shedeur's stats, he played in a more rigid pro style offense with less help around him in terms of weapons at receiver during that Ole Miss time period, and in a much tougher conference with much tougher competition around him. So that's why Eli Manning got away with what he was trying to do in 2003, and Shedeur Sanders didn't. You just can't afford to do things like that if you are Shedeur Sanders. And Deion Sanders, again, he is cherry picking in a huge way when he talks about the report that Shedeur was just not prepared for NFL interviews. There's a lot more to it than that.